Uncertainty is highly related to human adaptability and to curiosity. And look at those qualities. Well, that's what we need in a time of flux. That's precisely what we need. So to lean into, it might be uncomfortable and challenging. Uncertainty is no picnic because we don't want to remain in limbo. But at the same time, are we going to wield and harness this incredible capacity we have to be uncertain? Or are we going to retreat into the familiar, the comfortable, and the closed-mindedness of certainty? I mean, that's the question facing us today.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. We live in a world that feels increasingly volatile and uncertain, and our yearning for certainty makes us cling to quick answers, simplistic solutions, and rigid ideologies. Anything to avoid the discomfort of not knowing. But what if there is beauty in uncertainty? What if embracing uncertainty could actually help us thrive? Today, I'm speaking with Maggie Jackson, award-winning author and journalist, whose latest book, Uncertain: The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure, explores the surprising power of uncertainty. The book was featured in Library Journal's Top 10 Social Sciences Books of 2023, as well as nominated for a National Book Award. Maggie's previous book, Distracted: Reclaiming Our Focus in a World of Lost Attention, ignited global conversations about our tech-centric lives and the need to reclaim our attention. Maggie is a highly sought-after speaker and has appeared at venues such as Harvard Business School and the New York Public Library. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and NPR, and she holds degrees from Yale and the London School of Economics. All right, Maggie, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Brandon.
Yeah, I really absolutely loved your book, and it was such a delight. And I want to ask you a little bit about the other two books as well that have been really quite remarkable that I looked at briefly. But before we begin, I want to ask you, as I do with all my guests, to share a story of a profound encounter with beauty that you had in your childhood. Any memory of beauty that lingers with you till today?
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I think that I spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks, in the mountains, and literally on top of a mountain in a kind of rustic cabin that was owned by my father's family, that when we first were living there as a child had no running water. We collected rainwater. There was no bathroom, indoor plumbing. And it was a really unusual childhood. Every summer we would go there. And I would say, just being in the woods like that, I remember there's no one particular moment, but I guess being near the river and hearing the rush of the river. And then from the front porch of that cabin, camp really was, we were in the treetops because the front porch was at the top tree level. And so the view was, and the sounds and the sensory moment, just for me, a little bookworm as a child, reading books on that porch is one of the most beautiful times of my childhood.
That's amazing. Wow. And it sounds like an incredible series of moments of communion with nature, I would imagine. And yet probably also a lot of uncertainty as you have to collect rainwater. And I mean, was that a bittersweet or was it difficult to do that when you would go there in the summers, or easy to adapt? Or
I think when you're a child and you don't know I knew the other modern life from the rest of the year. My parents were teachers, so they could spend the whole summer there. But we did kind of enter in this new world where I guess one could say I might not have used the word uncertainty, but I would have talked about it as unpredictability. You never knew what creatures you'd encounter in the forest, including bears. I spent a lot of time out on the mountain by myself. And so the dynamism of life was really apparent. And I think that's one of the positive and sometimes overlooked aspects of uncertainty, that it is basically part of the dynamism of life.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think our tolerance for that dynamism is probably varied. And I think it'd be good to hear how we can improve that. So I want to ask you a little bit about your trajectory as a journalist. I mean, what drew you then to pursue a career as a journalist, and say a little bit about the two books you wrote before uncertain on the importance of home and then distracted?
Sure. Yes, and I was writing ever since I can remember. Since I was about age 5, I always wanted to be a reporter. And so I grew up in the high school and college newspapers and then just gave it a whirl. So I was a correspondent in DC and then elsewhere in the United States, and then went abroad when I was in my 20s to be based in Tokyo for a few years and then in London. But I traveled all over the world as a journalist. So I was drawn to it, I guess, because I just love meeting new people. I love asking questions. I'm naturally curious. And I thought if this was just when you pair that idea of being curious and open with the skill of the learned skill over time of writing, you kind of end up figuring things out. So I just love every bit of journalism, and I still do. It takes me to places I wouldn't otherwise go.
Right.
And just like books do, and just like our children do.
Yeah,
So so that's how I came into it. I was 40 or something before I wrote my first book. I had been steeped in the journalism, but I also wanted to do something longer and deeper, AKA a book. So now I see that these 3 books are actually a kind of a trilogy. I had been writing as a foreign correspondent and then as a national columnist on work-life balance and workplace issues. I'd always been writing about big picture social issues. And so the 3 books that I've written have really been about aspects of the human condition that are misunderstood or overlooked somehow. The first book was on the nature of home in the digital age, and when home is permeable and portable, and Starbucks looks like our living room, and, home and work, the walls have fallen down, where do we find refuge? The second book was about distraction and attention, and what does it mean to attend or pay attention, again, in a technological world. And what that one was more focused on what exactly is our technology doing to our skills of attention. And what is attention? Because most people couldn't even define it on the street. I wouldn't have been able to. And then finally, a book on uncertainty, which is, of course, a very misunderstood construct in general, but also the mindset of uncertainty, our psychological uncertainty, wasn't really studied in many disciplines, even psychology, until recently, because many, at least in the West particularly, were very outcome oriented. So psychologists would put people in a scanner and get the what happened during the task. Were they successful? Did they see the dot move or not? But they weren't as interested in the process. And also, what's happening with our brain on uncertainty. So it's a really wonderful time to tackle that particular subject.
Yeah, no, it's very apt, and even your previous book certainly was very prescient. I mean, you wrote Distracted even well before the social media craze that has enslaved so many of us and robbed us of our attention. Let's talk about uncertain then. You start the book making a distinction between 2 types of uncertainty, and you were mainly dealing with one of those types. Can you tell us a bit about that distinction?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're asking, because it's a good place to start, because uncertainty seems so monolithic and swampy to people. And so generally with, still debate, but generally experts agree that there are 2 main kinds of uncertainty. In brief, there's aleatory uncertainty, which is kind of a shorthand for the uncertainty, or what humans can't fully know. We hear that a storm is barreling up the coast, but despite all of the, mathematical models, etc., we and the meteorologists do not quite know where it'll make landfall or what the damage will be. That's what we can't fully know. But then in complement is epistemic uncertainty, and I like to think of it as the human response to the unknown. So when you meet something new or unexpected or ambiguous, you gain the chance to, and this is the best definition that I've found among all sorts of definitions, you gain the chance to become metacognitively aware that you've reached the limits of your knowledge. So the storm might do damage, or you might have to move, or it could be this, it could be that. That's being unsure. And basically, you can see that there's multiple possibilities within uncertainty, but you're also caught short because you've reached the limits of your knowledge. So mainly my book focuses on our response to the unknown? How will we respond in a world that is truly, by many, many barometers, getting more unpredictable? In geopolitics, economics, and even job hours among the most vulnerable people, highly precarious. And so how do we respond?
Yeah, that's that's a very helpful distinction. And yeah, almost you're situating, the book certainly within the locus of our control, like what is it that we can do given uncertainty? And I think that one of the things you argue here, and this is really a striking paragraph, you say that far from automatically miring us in cognitive paralysis, uncertainty plays an essential role in higher order thinking, propelling people in challenging times towards good judgment, flexibility, mutual understanding, and the heights of creativity. It's the portal, you say, to finding your enemy's humanity, the overlooked linchpin of superior teamwork, and the mindset most needed in times of flux. So it sounds like a superpower to be able to tolerate and handle and even lean into uncertainty. And yet, you talk about John Dewey, who notes that we are on a quest for certainty, right? I mean, it seems like we are yearning for certainty as human beings, and that also seems somewhat part of our nature, or I don't know if it's just cultural, but it seems like a pervasive human tendency. So how do we reconcile those? How do we reconcile our desire for certainty with this need to tolerate and actually build a capacity for uncertainty?
Yes, no, I think that is really, really important, because the first thing I would say is that we dislike uncertainty for natural and very good reasons. We tend to find, as psychologists say, uncertainty aversive, and that's because we, as just organisms, need and want answers. For survival's sake, we have to know whether the fruit in the tree is delicious or poisonous, et cetera, et cetera. So we find it, and even studies by an Australian philosopher, Michael Smithson, show that the metaphors we use in and around uncertainty are usually negative, like knowing is the light and uncertainty is darkness, and they go on and on. But this is one reason why anything that's comfortable or fluent or easy, as Kahneman said, brings a smile to our faces. It's, the familiar. But we don't want to have limitless uncertainty at the same time. We dislike it. We need to get an answer, but no one would want to remain in uncertainty. So uncertainty has boundaries, has guardrails, I like to think of it as. And one question I think today is, well, we innately dislike it, but I think we are pushing toward almost an allergy of uncertainty. And we mentioned that a little bit. So therefore, we need and want answers. But everything, or many things, conspire in our culture to prioritize outcome and kind of lose sight of process, and to be allergic to even discomfort, and therefore race to answers. And even the epidemic anxiety, which is literally fear of the unknown, clinically speaking, is a little bit of a signal that maybe we've carried our innate dislike too far through contemporary culture and hundreds of years of pushing toward, as Dewey said, the quest for certainty. So on the way to gaining an answer, that's where we can see the strength of uncertainty. We can see it as a space of possibilities. We can see it as a spur and a provocation, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more of that. But it's basically a really important cognitive skill set, and it's multiple, not singular. Uncertainty is actually very much a part and parcel of good decision making, understanding the neighbor whose politics you loathe, opening up your mind. I mean, just to use some big abstract terms, it's highly related to human resilience. Uncertainty is highly related to human adaptability and to curiosity. And look at those qualities. Well, that's what we need in a time of flux. That's precisely what we need. So to lean into, it might be uncomfortable and challenging. Uncertainty is no picnic, because we don't want to remain in limbo. But at the same time, are we going to wield and harness this incredible capacity we have to be uncertain, or are we going to retreat into the familiar, the comfortable, and the closed-mindedness of certainty? I mean, that's the question facing us today.
Yeah. We've weathered a tremendous pandemic, which has I think, rattled, around the world. And a lot of that experience was living through a very difficult kind of uncertainty. And I wonder whether you think that that context has, and even just before that, not too long before that, we had this huge, Great Recession in 2008. And it seems like and now with, the AI revolution coming up, it seems like we are in this context where not only have we maybe experienced a lot of intense uncertainty, but it feels like the future with, are we on the brink of a third world war? And in the United States, we've got the elections coming up in a month. I don't know, this episode's probably going to air the day before the elections, maybe. What thoughts do you have on just our condition as having maybe been hit by a lot of shocks of uncertainty? And is that partly driving us to try to hunker down towards finding more certainty? And is it possible for us to be open in the ways in which you're suggesting?
Yeah, and I think very much so. I mean, I think what you're talking about is the extreme volatility and threat that does exist today. And so it's very much perhaps essentially more uncomfortable to live at the edge of the uncertainty out there, the uncertainty. But at the same time, I think that it's really important, again, to return to the question of what can we do? And so on a smaller but no less existential level, many people have written to me about how uncertainty can be good in conditions such as facing cancer, a cancer diagnosis. So my response is that, again, if we can navigate uncertainty, be skillful in our uncertainty, we are better able to navigate and be skillful in life. It doesn't remove the big bad wolves at the door to be uncertain. It's not a panacea for making everything right. But when you can, say, calibrate to your environment instead of closing down and being certain in prior convictions that are no longer relevant, when you can learn to be curious and exploratory in the face of even the most difficult conditions, that's when uncertainty is liberating and strengthening. And in fact, I've interviewed doctors who have been teaching uncertainty tolerance to patients with anxiety to actually treat anxiety. And I'll also just explain what I mean, but just the doctors themselves who are teaching people how to navigate uncertainty then say it changes their practice, their lens on the world. They don't have to be quite the authority that they felt like they had to be. They're, a partner in care. They can be more improvisational, even playful. And so all of the ability to be uncertain skillfully, many people have just used the word liberating. And I can see, just to get granular, for instance, there is now a lot of attention to a personality trait called tolerance of uncertainty. What I've mentioned is actually a personality trait. And so just like you or I might be more or less shy or conscientious, we also fall somewhere on a kind of spectrum of tolerance for uncertainty. And so during the pandemic, the acute phase of the pandemic, people who were more tolerant of uncertainty were more accepting of the realities of that situation. Now, there were many question marks and you didn't know everything, but they were more accepting of the good or the bad or the changing, understanding of what it was, et cetera. People who were intolerant of uncertainty were more likely to cope by denying or avoiding the situation or abusing substances. So from that, you can kind of see when you're tolerant of uncertainty, you see life's unpredictability as a challenge. And when you're intolerant, you see it as a threat. And that's a huge and foundational difference. And so that's just one aspect of how we approach or have a stance or an attitude toward uncertainty. Beyond that, there's a lot of strategies and different types of uncertainty, and we can gain skill in crisis deliberations through wielding our uncertainty, or we can gain skill in creative daydreaming through being more practiced in those what if questions. There are lots of different types of uncertainty, but this stance, this sort of personality approach that we all have. And again, the big news too is that it's innate, just like our dislike is innate. We all don't like uncertainty. We all fall somewhere on that spectrum. But what's really important is that it's mutable. So going back to those psychologists who are treating anxiety, now there's a lot of attention to laser focused treatments for anxiety that are based simply on trying to bolster that tolerance of uncertainty. So what does that mean? Basically, it's kind of like interventions and therapy strategies that are jumping off exposure therapy.
Right.
So if I'm afraid of spiders, I'll sit next to a plastic one, and then I'll go outside and I'll look at a spider from a distance, etc. Well, this is exposure therapy to the unknown. So you bite off a little more of the unknown each day by maybe delegating at work or by trying a new dish in a restaurant. I mean, something I kind of laughed at, but then I thought, oh, that's actually a little harder than it sounds on a tired, when you're tired on a Friday night and you want that familiar food that brings a smile to your face. Right. So I think little daily exercises that boost our tolerance for uncertainty are really hopeful. And the fact that they're being used for treatments in mental disorders with proven success, gold standard, longitudinal success, random control trials, that's really an important new finding.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No. So expanding our capacity for uncertainty and reducing the fear of uncertainty seems really critical, right? And I wonder if improv comedy would be another good recommendation for trying to open that capacity up.
Anything that's improvisational, yes, is really working with your uncertainty rather than hiding from it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the interesting things we found during the pandemic was that there was a lot of variation across countries in, people's ability to tolerate, I suppose, that uncertainty and the role of expertise, right? And you say a little bit about the extent to which leaders are trusted when they voice uncertainty. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about that. And I have some questions for you on that theme. But how can uncertainty be either helpful or challenging? Because it seems like when we're in difficult times, we want our leaders to be really strong and certain.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we want, of course, to move toward answers, and we want our leaders to usher us and work with us to getting answers. But the difference is, do we want the first answer? When we're coming up with, again, something new, complex, and ambiguous, really, do you want the first answer that crops up, the rush to judgment, or do you want to invest in the better answer, which is skillful uncertainty? One study I really love kind of speaks to this. Again, it was a gold standard, award-winning longitudinal study of CEOs in the middle of a long-term crisis. In this case, they were European CEOs who were facing an expansion in the EU. So therefore, a big, big, big change in the marketplace. Well, in short, the ones who were said before the expansion, we're sure we know this is going to be good or bad for our company, or they felt in control, were the ones who during and after the expansion did almost nothing at all to respond. They stuck to the tried and true. Yeah. Whereas the CEOs who were ambivalent, who weren't sure whether it's good or bad or what might happen, dug in, and they were more inclusive. They sought multiple perspectives, and they were more resourceful. They did inventive things to respond, like open up a new factory or what have you. So that's a perfect example of two things. One is that uncertainty is a space of possibility. And then second, of something called adaptive expertise. There have been lots of studies over a great deal of time about, how we accrue expertise by those 10,000 hours or what have you, experience and practice. And then your knowledge becomes second nature.
Right.
Which is good. And that's important because the doctor who hears somebody say chest pains thinks heart attack. And that's important because he is applying what he's learned in the past to a recognizable situation. But the trouble is that people grow complacent. They keep fighting the old battles. They slide into what's called carryover mode and then keep applying the old, heuristic thinking and mental models to those new complex problems. And that's when they get in trouble. So years of accuracy are only weakly or not correlated at all with, years of experience are hardly correlated in multiple different disciplines with skill and accuracy over time. And I think, whatever field we're in, I think we all can recognize that complacent expert.
Yeah.
And in contrast is the adaptive expert who spends more time diagnosing the problem than even beginners. They inhabit the question. Even I went up to Toronto and I embedded myself in operating rooms, which was quite amazing. And I was just feet from the patient with my tape recorder, seeing these amazing things. And, I could see one surgeon in particular acting like the kind of expert we adore, all know-how, swaggering, efficient, etc., until he came to this horrific near miss that, could have killed the patient. And he really was being the routine expert, whereas the adaptive expert is the one who calibrates to the situation. And that only can take a few minutes of thinking and testing and questioning and widening their options, etc. So it's very much uncertainty and action, a mode of uncertainty and action is what I call it.
Yeah. How much is this related to something like humility? It seems like that there's a connection between what you're talking about and a kind of disposition of humility and being comfortable with not knowing and willingness to admit one's limitations, but also a willingness to accept what one does know, right? There's almost a balance where you can't have a humility that says, well, I don't know anything. So what does that look like in practice for you?
Yeah, I think humility might be a individual sort of personal centrist idea of the world. So in other words, intellectual humility is to know the limits of your knowledge. And humility as maybe a moral stance is to ratchet back the idea that you are the center of the universe and allow for other opinions and things like that. Uncertainty is, you can be humble and not be uncertain. Uncertainty is a overlapping and complementary mindset or a set of mindsets that equips you to be open to the world, to be open to others' perspectives, to think twice, to reflect, etc. So I see them as very connected but different things.
All right, that's a good place to stop the first half of our conversation. We're going to pick up next week where Maggie talks about fallow times and Darwin's golden rule, how kids growing up in highly stressful environments may have hidden strengths, and the importance of building uncertainty into AI systems. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already, and please leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you think about the show.